The thermostat on your wall is the cleanest example of negative feedback you will ever see, and it teaches the entire AP Biology Unit 4 concept in one moment. When the room gets too warm, the thermostat senses the change and triggers the air conditioning to cool it back down. When the room gets too cold, it triggers the heater to warm it back up. Every loop in biology that maintains homeostasis works exactly that way, and the AP exam is testing whether you can spot the pattern in a living system. Negative feedback is a control loop, where the response reduces the original change. If a variable rises above normal, the loop lowers it. If a variable falls below normal, the loop raises it. The word negative does not mean harmful or bad. It means the response acts against the direction of the original change. That single insight is enough to answer roughly half of every Unit 4 question on feedback mechanisms. Every negative feedback loop is built around something called a set point, which is the target value or normal range that the system tries to maintain. Body temperature sits around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Blood glucose sits around 90 milligrams per deciliter when fasting. Blood pH sits around 7.4. When you see any of those numbers drift in a stimulus, the loop firing back is almost certainly negative feedback pulling the value home. The textbook example AP graders love most is blood glucose regulation after a meal. When you eat, blood glucose rises sharply, and the pancreas detects the spike and releases insulin within minutes. Insulin signals your muscle, liver, and fat cells to absorb glucose out of the blood, which pushes the level back down toward the normal range. This is negative feedback in its purest form, because the response, insulin, directly counteracts the original change, the glucose spike. The other classic example is body temperature during exercise. When you run, your muscles generate heat and your core temperature starts climbing. Sensors in the hypothalamus detect the rise and trigger two responses: sweating to evaporate heat away from the skin, and increased blood flow to the surface where that heat can radiate out. Both responses work to lower the original temperature increase, which makes this another textbook case of negative feedback acting against the stimulus. Every negative feedback loop has the same 4 parts, and naming them on an FRQ earns easy structural points. First, the stimulus is the change that moves a variable away from normal. Second, the sensor or receptor detects that change. Third, the signal pathway, often a hormone or nerve signal, carries the message. Fourth, the effector is the cell, tissue, or organ that actually produces the corrective response. When any of these 4 parts breaks, the entire loop fails. AP graders love to ask what happens when negative feedback fails, because the answer reveals whether you understand the loop or just memorize the example. If sensors cannot detect the disturbance, the loop never starts. If the signal is disrupted, the response is weak or absent. If the effector cannot act, the variable stays abnormal. Type 1 diabetes is a real-world failure case where missing insulin breaks the glucose loop and blood sugar stays dangerously high. On any negative feedback-free response question, the move that locks in full credit is a 4-part structure that you should rehearse before the exam. Identify the stimulus that moved the variable away from normal. Name the response that the body produces. Explain how that response reduces the original change. Predict what happens as the variable moves back toward the set point. Hit all 4 pieces, and you walk out with the entire rubric.
You can drill 18 flashcards and 8 AP-style practice questions on negative feedback in under 15 minutes using the link below. That is the difference between a 3 and a 5. Subscribe for new AP videos every week.